All right, so I want to show what I think is probably the most important feature of the Metasmile of why I like it as a facial scanner. You know, the quality's good, the resolution's good, all of that is fine, but really these things don't add any value unless you can get an accurate stitch to your facial scan with your intraoral scan. And so at this point, this is actually a friend of mine's patient, and so I went to his office and we just did facial scans. So we did a retracted and a smiling, and then after the fact, when I was back home, he sent me the intraoral scans. So what I've done is I've opened back up the case, but I've added in the intraoral scans that he sent me, and it's important to note that these are not necessarily from a Shining 3D intraoral scanner. I believe he has a Medit, and so it does work with other brands of scanners. Now, one thing I have noticed is there's an auto stitch feature, and we'll try that here in a second. I have noticed that I get more often a dead-on auto stitch with no effort when I'm using a Shining 3D intraoral scanner, but you'll see if that fails, it's super easy to override and do a manual. And so now that I've reopened the case, it now has the intraoral scan data, so it brings you right to this step where now you're aligning this. And so I'm curious just to see if we can do this auto align. So we'll just click it and give it a try. And actually it did a nice job. It stitched right in there. Now, I can tell that it's in the ballpark, but how do we know that this is accurate? You know, if you do this in, for example, Blue Sky Plan, you're going to have to verify your stitch purely based on model outlines, and that's very difficult to do. Remember, your intraoral scans have super high resolution. Facial scans invariably are going to be lower resolution. They can still have great accuracy, but low resolution. So think of your grandma's TV versus like an 8K TV. And so there might be rounding of corners and things like that. So I can tell right here this is in the ballpark, but how do I know for sure? Okay, if I go to this is the occlusion view. And what this does is it gives me this color map. And the fact that everything is green on that upper arch tells me exactly what I wanted to know, which is that these are a good stitch. Now, you might look at this, and I've had people say, well, in exocad you can do a best fit match, and it doesn't look like it's very close. Well, actually, the exocad has a similar thing, but its scale here, remember, we're dealing with super high resolution, low resolution. The scale on exocad is so insanely small, it's amazing for stitching objects that are almost dead perfect to one another. But these are inherently not going to be that. Again, lower resolution facial scan. So what I need to know is a larger scale. So you can see this goes from 0 is green up to, you know, light blue 1 millimeter, dark blue 2 millimeters, and vice versa. So what I'm looking for is that green, and if I have green across the upper arch, which is the one I'm stitching, that tells me that's a good stitch. And I don't necessarily get that in exocad. I'll try to actually show it in exocad and show you that it's much more difficult to see that that's a good stitch. So that one worked great, actually. We did the auto stitch. If we hadn't, all you've got to do is like put 3 dots, a dot here, dot here, dot here on the intraoral scan and on the facial scan. It'll match them right up. And so this looks great now. I think that we've got everything that we need there. And so I'm going to go ahead and click go to predesign. And now we can look at everything stitched up. All right, so let's take this one down. And you can see I only had to do the upper arch. Okay, so when I brought the upper arch, it brought the lower arch with it. So that's saving you a little bit of steps. But that's exactly what I want to see. And you can always turn the texture off and really see this. So I want you to appreciate the low resolution versus high resolution that I'm talking about. That's high accuracy, low resolution. I can't see every embrasure, every whatever, right? But especially the flats of the teeth, pretty accurate. Now you'll have a better view on this one. Once again, great accuracy, very low resolution. You can see it can't reproduce the details in there, but based on that color map, we know that that's a really good match. All right, so when I turn this on now, you can see we've got excellent adaptation to that. And I can just tell you, I've analyzed these in 4 different programs. The best stitches are the ones I'm getting right here within the software natively. And also the fact that that happens in this step saves me so much time when I get to either Blue Sky Plan or ExoCAD. So one last thing I forgot we want to do, we want to also extract on one of our facial scans of him smiling. We want to do a lip line extraction. And so what I'll do is I'll click the auto extract, but I'm going to go ahead and turn the texture off, and I'll adjust this to exactly where I want it to cut out the teeth on one of these facial scans so that we could see our wax up within his face. So I just, you can see the peak of where the lip begins to roll over. I just usually try to put it right around at that. And then we'll click slicing. And now you can see that in this facial scan, the teeth or the information on the facial scan has been cut out. So when a wax up gets done on this, I'll be able to see it within his face. All right. So now with that done, we're going to go ahead and click go to send. We'll export this data. I want to do OBJs and STLs. And now we have all of this stuff. Okay. Okay, so we've done facial scans on this patient and we've done intraoral scans on this patient. We've got them stitched up natively within the Shining 3D software. And now we would be ready to go ahead and do the wax up. You can see this is a patient with a collapsed bite. We're going to definitely have to open his VDO. And so when I'm doing that wax up, I find it very difficult to just simply look at this, and maybe even if I have 2D pictures, that certainly helps, but I find it very difficult to set my facial planes and really have my orientation proper to know where the cant of the smile should be, the occlusal plane, and all that kind of stuff. So this is a really easy trick that I do that makes it just dead obvious where I need to put the occlusal plane. All right. Remember, everything is relative to the face. All right. We're so used to sending things to the lab. This is all they get, and maybe a terrible picture is what most docs will send to them. That makes the lab technician's job very difficult. They don't have the patient's face, and so when you get a wax up or restorations back and there's maybe a little cant to them, well, no wonder. It's very difficult to see where the face is. So one of the things that I will do is I will open this up in a program like Mesh Mixer, and I have this as a pre-saved shape, but I'm going to just make it for you so you can see it in real time. I go to Mesh Mix, and under primitives, you just have all these primitive shapes. This is a plane. All right, so I can bring in a plane here, and what I want to do is I'm going to orient this first of all to the facial midline. All right, so something like this. All right, and I want to split right through the center of his face. All right, and I look at this from all planes. So it can look good there, and then you look here, it's obviously a bit off kilter. All right, so this should be coming right through the middle of the bridge of his nose, and then through the rest of his face. And I can see, while I'm centered on the bridge of his nose, I'm not really centered through his nose. The other reference I use is this upper philtrum of the lip. All right, so your lip, it comes up and it comes to this little point right here. And when you look at a smile, you're drawn to how everything is oriented to that. Noses, they're unreliable. If you start looking, especially with facial scans, you'll notice virtually everyone has asymmetry with their nose. So if I did it based on that, then I would end up pointing my smile more this direction. All right, well, I don't want to do that. I want to orient to his overall face. So filter him of the lip. It looks relatively centered on his lower chin, although again, chins can have lots of asymmetry as well. And then how am I doing coming through the very middle of the bridge of his nose? That to me looks like it's right through the center of his face, and I'm really trying to ignore his teeth. I don't want to be tricked by just pulling it right to the midline of their current 8 and 9, because that may be wrong. Okay, so I've got that. I still want to make sure that I'm coming through the middle when I look from this direction. So I'm more trying to think symmetry of his head here. Am I too far this way or that way? All right. When I'm looking at that, I'm looking just at the overall width of his head. It looks like I'm right in the middle. I might be ever so slightly a little off to there. So when I make that change, I need to come back now and verify that I am still in the bridge of his nose. And actually that looks pretty good. So one thing I'm finding out right now is his 8 and 9 are pretty centered on his facial midline. That's helpful. A lot of times it's hard to fudge midline shifts and things like that. All right, so we've got this one plane set. Now, really easy. Let's go to Edit, Duplicate, and then I'm going to hit T for Transform on my keyboard, and I'm going to spin this one 90 degrees. All right, this one I want to orient right through the middle of his interpupillary line. All right, and since it's a bit harder to make out pupils, you can also cheat it a little bit by looking at the canthus of the eye. All right, so am I going through the center of the canthus of his eye? And then furthermore, I'll take this plane, and what do we use as a reference for occlusal plane when we're doing dentures? We use the ala tragus. All right, so it's essentially the middle of the tragus of the ear to the ala of the nose. All right, so I can spin it in both directions. And that, for most people, should be a pretty close approximation of their occlusal plane. All right, so now this is parallel to interpupillary. It's parallel to ala tragus. And I've got this thing where it's scalable and I can move it up and down. And then let's think, if we were doing a rehab, we would want the incisal edge of the maxillary centrals to be roughly approximating the wet dry line of the lip, right? And so I would probably set this to where I would like the edge of his number 8 and 9 to end up, which is about right there, maybe actually a little bit longer. He certainly needs some more length. See the wet dry line of the lip right in there. And he's kind of got a very open smile. I don't know that I would bring it all the way down. If I did that, it would mimic a super youthful smile. But if you put a 16-year-old smile on, an older gentleman, that's going to look a bit goofy. So he probably needs a couple of millimeters added to his incisal length. All right. So now what I'm building is this jig that orients me in space, so that when I now go to Exocad or Blue Sky or wherever I'm going to do his wax up, I can just almost turn the face off, and I'll be able to look at these models relative to the face. Okay? And that gives me a really good reference of where I need to set teeth. All right. Now, in his case, I'm looking at this. His occlusal plane is much steeper than what I had indicated. I would probably say his occlusal plane is resting about right there. And I'm curious how that orients to the face. See, he's definitely got a steeper occlusal plane than what the ala tragus would give you. And this is where just a bit of experience comes in of trying to figure out, do we follow the quote rules and orient it dead to allotragus, or do we kind of work a little bit with their biology and their current joint structure and all that kind of stuff? So I'll probably split the difference and maybe back off just a little bit. And consider maybe that to be my occlusal plane. And even if I fudge this and I don't exactly follow it, having this symmetry as a reference when I'm doing the wax up becomes so valuable. If I can look right to left and see that I'm the same distance with cusp tips relative to this horizontal, I know that we're going to end up with symmetry in the mouth. All right. And once again, I want to pull this thing down to where I would like his incisal edge to end up, which is right about there. We'll just fudge it to right there. Okay. Now we've got facial planes set. All right. When I'm doing the wax up, there's one other thing I'd be interested to know, and that is how far out to bring his incisors. Let's look at his teeth, and his incisors are kind of tucked back. Most people's incisors are labially inclined. You can see his are kind of retroclined. They're a very straight up and down, if not retroclined position. So we could probably get a more attractive smile if we labially inclined that a little bit, because once again, look at his wet draw line of the lip right there. A better incisal edge would probably be closer to right around in here where my arrow is on the mouse. Okay, so I'm doing all these things just to make my life simpler when I get to the stage of waxing it up. All right, so let's take this, let's duplicate it once more, T for transform, and what I'm going to do is spin this one 90 degrees. I don't need it to be that long, so I'm going to shorten it way down, and I'll pull this anteriorly to where I would like that incisal edge to rest. Okay, I'm making this much smaller. So when I start doing the wax up, I'm going to try to bring the incisal edge to about right there facially. All right. So now I know occlusal plane, I know midline, I know occlusal plane, and I know where I want to bring the incisal edge of number 8 and 9. Okay. Pure gold. So right now these are 3 different objects. I don't need them to be this big. I'm going to make this much skinnier. Because when you get objects this big within any of these programs, they kind of become a pain in the butt. All right, we've already verified that's oriented properly to his face. All right, this one, it's huge. I don't need it to be that big, because when I'm doing the wax up, I'm really only concentrating on his arches. I could really turn the face off at this point. Okay, and then I'm making this skinnier. That's as big as I need that thing to be. Okay, the fact that I've already oriented it to the face means that, you know, I can just turn this shape on and off. All right. Once again, this one, let's transform it. It's awfully big. I don't need something that big as a reference. And again, I can spin it in this direction without changing the midline of the face. So I'm going to I'm going to bring that to about right there. And I'm just scaling these down to his arches. So do you see how now I have this very useful reference? I want to bring the incisal edge of 8 and 9 out to here. This is going to be the midline of 8 and 9 that we're centering the arches on, and that's going to be approximately the occlusal plane. I don't follow the occlusal plane to a T. You know, we're going to have to open his arches and fudge things a little here and there, but again, so useful to have this. So now that I've got all of that, I'm going to just take those 3 planes that I created and combine them, and I'm going to save this as his facial planes. So now that's saved, and when I pull this into whatever program I do, I can pull this plane in along with any of the other stuff, the facial scans and all of that, and we should be good to go. Alright, so his midline is almost dead on. Remember, that was set based on his face, so it's a millimeter off. It's not bad. We can easily do that. So I'm not going to show in this video doing the whole wax up, but I did just want you to see the end result. You can see here are our planes that we've imported. You know, we've scaled them down so that they're, you know, more scaled to the models, but here's the facial midline, here is the horizontal plane or the occlusal plane, and here's where I wanted to put the incisal edge. So when you look at my final wax ups, you can see how I used those to help orient me based again on his facial planes. And that way, you know, how do you miss the midline or the occlusal plane if you've got all this information relative to their face? So definitely something I find useful in doing these complex cases. Hopefully it helps you out. Thanks.